Hello, my name is Claire Krieger and I am an art instructor at Sacred Heart School for the Arts. Today we're going to be making Collagraph Prints. This is my Collagraph plate. So this is what we are going to be building first to then make prints. And by prints I mean we can make multiples. We will use this almost like a stamp. So Collagraph is a type of printmaking. If you've ever seen a printing press, you lay down your different materials and you crank it and it runs through and it pushes your plate. It could be a collagraph, it could be a monoprint, which means it's plexiglass with paint on it, and all of the different printmaking processes that use a printing press, it's just pushing that ink into the paper. So it's getting a really fine print, and then you can ink it up again and do it another time. So with printmaking, traditionally you can do multiples. So other types of printmaking you might be familiar with, silkscreen. So if you have any sort of t-shirt or poster that has a graphic or a logo on it, that is essentially done by screen printing, which is a printmaking process to make multiples of. So that's another printmaking process. Stamps, those are essentially printmaking. Imagine that printmaking is anything where we could make multiples. We could make many. We could make a bunch of the same one. It's not like a one-off drawing or painting. So collagraphs are a specific type of printmaking we are making through texture, and it's sort of a relief or a three-dimensional style printmaking. Rather than just using line or a design, we are using actual three-dimensional texture. So I have created my collagraph print, or plate, excuse me, using different materials and different textures from around my home. So I've used some yarn up here, which I've sort of woven around into different designs. I have a plastic twist tie because I thought it was kind of crinkly and it might make a nice texture. I have corrugated cardboard, which I have ripped the top surface off of so you can see the actual ridges. Maybe you can see it. Sort of, yeah. I have some beads. I cut this off of some scrap fabric. I have some foam. I have some other fabric here, and I can feel all of these textures. So when we're going to be using our collagraph plates to make a print, it's important that we have the texture because that is how our prints will be made. So this is my finished plate, which we're going to use to print with in a little bit, and I'm going to show you how I made this plate. So this looks pretty strong, and that is because I have attached all my materials and then I've coated it to be really, really, really strong. So this might take a little bit of time, but we're going to get started right now. And if you have to pause this or you want to come back later, that's also okay. So the materials that we are going to need today: cardboard. So the backing of my collagraph plate is cardboard. It's actually pretty thin cardboard. I used a Ritz cracker box, and then I attached things on top. Now you could use heavier cardboard if you want. You want it to just be pretty flat because it's going to be holding all of our materials. Other materials are things you can find around the house that aren't too thick or tall, but they have a good texture. So I have this foam surplus. I have some scrap yarn pieces. And imagine the color doesn't matter because we'll be transferring it with paint. So some textured materials from around the house we get to collect. I've got a piece of denim. I have some fabric. And then I also thought I might use this piece of a plastic bag. So materials to build our plate. We need a cardboard base, and then we need materials for the top. So think about what you have around. I bet you can find some interesting things around your home to use for this. Now, we're also going to need a type of glue. I'm going to use hot glue. I think it works pretty well to attach all of these, and it's pretty fast. But if you don't have hot glue, or you don't have anyone to help you with your hot glue, you can also use white glue. It's just going to take a little bit longer to dry. We just want something that's going to adhere our pieces to our plate very well. So hot glue or white glue will work fine. Now, that is to make our plate itself. Now, to make a print, we are going to need some paper. And probably heavier paper is a little bit better if we're going to use paint, but use what you have at home. So I have some watercolor tests that I did, and I might print right on top of this, but I could also print on this flat side. So we're going to need paper to print on, and then also we're going to need some paint. So I've just got acrylic paint. Whatever paint you have at home is probably fine. I'm going to be applying my paint to my plate using paint brushes. So the typical stuff you need with paint. I've got a cup of water, I've got some paint, and I have brushes. So those are most of the materials we're going to need. Now, after we build our plate, to make sure it's really strong and so we could use it a couple of times, You know, when cardboard or paper gets wet, it kind of becomes fragile. We can't use it a lot. It breaks easily. So if we're going to be putting paint on this and we want to use it more than once, we need to protect it. So after all of my items dried, I coated mine with Mod Podge, which is essentially a sealer. You can use it as a glue or a finish, but you can use a lot of things for this. You could use, if you have any sort of home materials around, you might be able to find some polyurethane or something that if you have parents that do homework at all or work on your house, maybe that's something you could use to coat it. It will take a little bit of time to dry. So there are a few steps and we're gonna have to wait in between. I made this ahead of time so that I could show you what it looks like when it's finished and show you how to print it. But this is a little bit more of a time process. So letting glue dry and then letting it seal properly. So some sort of sealer. You could probably also use a pretty strong glue. I probably wouldn't use white glue on top, but if that's all you have, go for it. We just want to make our plates last a little bit longer by coating the top of it and to make it pretty stiff. So the way that we're going to get started is we are going to grab our base piece. So I have this cardboard base piece, again, another Ritz cracker box, and it can be any size, any shape that you want. I thought this was kind of nice because it wasn't a full size, but it's a decent size to make something. It's similar to the first one I made. Now we're going to start making our composition. When I had shown you the corrugated cardboard on mine before, you know, you could tell we have ridges, and I know we can see that inside of cardboard, but we have to expose it first. So it is under our first sheet, so it might take a little bit of testing to see where it's easiest to get it off, get one side off. If you want to use the ridges, I think they make a pretty neat print. It's kind of a cool resource. So we just have to pull one side of it off, and like I said, it just takes a little bit of practice. I'm going to pull a little bit more of this off. And your Collagraph print, as far as composition goes, it can be anything you want it to be. I think it's sort of fun to play with texture in these because they are so texture heavy that I would say find things that you like the textures of because that's going to print in a neat way. So you're going to need some scissors to cut things. But if you have, like, say, burlap, that might make a really good texture as far as fabric goes. Okay, so you can see I've exposed a lot of those ridges, which I think might turn out pretty cool. So I'm not going to glue things right away. I'm going to try to work on a sort of composition first. And I'm not sure how this foam will print, but it's sort of strange the way that it's squishy. And this would otherwise just be kind of going into landfill, so it's sort of nice I could figure out a way to repurpose it. Maybe if I make a wavy part, that might like just turn out kind of cool. Yeah, actually I'm happy with that. So on my other plate, I had squished a piece of this foam, but I think on this one, I'm just gonna leave as is. We'll see what happens. So I'm just gonna start lining up things, and I think now that I have a general idea of what my composition should be, I'm gonna start gluing it. So I'm just gonna put a little bit of hot glue here. And again, if you don't have hot glue at home, that's okay, you can use white glue. It's just going to take a little bit of time to dry, which is also fine. You could also make a scene that is a little bit more like a landscape or a portrait using textures. That's also fine. I just think it's kind of neat to experiment with texture. Okay, so I've started mine. It's going like this. I'm not sure what denim is going to do. I'm not sure if like the texture will show because it's fairly fine. It's not a very strong texture, but I'm going to give it a try. I'm going to put it right here in this corner. Now imagine you also want to think about keeping most of your textures about the same height. Just because if you have something really tall and really low, the low one might not show when we're actually printing these, which might be kind of a bummer if you put the work into it and you really liked it. I'm also going to think about, if you have something like foam, think about that you could also get some of the texture by sort of pushing into it or leaving a depression. Because where our paint is going to stick is going to be the different levels. So if we have something that's essentially the height of the cardboard, very low, we probably won't get any ink there. That's how we're creating our relief print. So I'm going to just push into this foam and see if I can, oops, sorry, I'm shaking. the screen. See if I can get any prints in that. We'll see what happens. So you can see I kind of made a lot of dimples in my foam. Now I'm going to put a little bit of yarn on here, and hopefully this texture of the yarn will show up because it's thick and chunky yarn, and it should come across that way. I'm actually gonna, so I made a whole pathway just with this hot glue. Now if you're using hot glue and you don't use it very often, I would recommend going pretty quickly because hot glue is gonna dry, and really it is the speed that you go with that is going to make it work well. I just got a little bit on my finger, but this isn't too hot of a gun, so yeah. Also be careful if you're using a hot glue gun because you can burn yourself pretty badly. I have a fairly not hot glue gun, so I'm not super worried about it. Then I'm just gonna do I'm gonna do like some fabric on fabric just to see what kind of texture happens. And if your plate ends up being higher, like if you're using thicker items, that's fine. Just remember that you want most of your items' height to be roughly the same. Well, you want a little bit of difference, but you don't want something super tall and super low because the lower parts will not print as well. So you can see all of mine are not particularly tall, but they're roughly the same. But if I had something over here that was, say, that tall, that's not going to work super well for the rest of my plate. It's also going to be harder to print. All right, I made a little texture stack here on the corner. Okay. Now, I went a little quickly with this, but you can take as much time as you want to arrange a plate for your Collagraph. So this is what mine looks like. You also might think you could use hot glue to make designs itself. That's not something I do very often, but it's also a possibility for sure. So here is my plate that I have created. I've got a couple layers here, so we'll see how that prints. So now that your plate is done, the way that we need to finish this is we need to put a coating on it to make it really strong. And to do that, I'm going to use my Mod Podge. And we want to be pretty liberal with it because we want it to be really strong. So I'm actually going to just squirt a little in a couple of places and then just make sure it's evenly spread. So, and again, the reason that we're coating it, so I'm just going to start like that, is to make sure that when we put paint on here, it's not going to immediately soak into our cardboard and to make it sort of a goopy mess where it all kind of falls apart. Have you ever had like your homework or a drawing that got wet and it just falls apart? It is something water and cardboard can't handle particularly very much water. I meant paper and cardboard. So we are coating it with something to protect it from that. So in case we wanted to print it a couple of times, then it would last a little bit better. It's also going to it's kind of going to set everything in stone. So it's really going to hold the texture in there. I'm just going to make sure that I've coated everything. Now, if you have anyone in your house that might have some clear spray paint, that's something that would also work really well. Polyurethane. Or if you just have Mod Podge, that's fine. Or if you have white glue, go for it. Give it a shot. We're just trying to make it a little bit stiffer and a little bit stronger for printmaking. Okay, so here's my plate. And I'm going to let it dry. Now, if it was dry and it still seemed like really flimsy, I might do another coat. That might be something you could do. But this is basically where you would stop now to let this dry for a printing and come back to me later. Since I have another plate, I'm going to show you how we will print this. Now, we talked a little bit about printing presses earlier and that you run your plate, if it were this, or if it were another kind of printmaking, on our paper, or the other way. And we would sandwich it with some other, typically some felt layers, and it gets smushed between two cones, so it's really pushed into the paper. So we're going to mimic that a little bit today, and there's a couple different ways to do this with DIY printmaking at home. Now, if you have a rolling pin, that could work, that could mimic it. I'm going to give it a shot today with a rolling pin. If you don't, it's also fine to use your hands. I do a lot of printmaking using my hands, just sort of making stamps. I've got an alternative if this seems a little complicated for you, I'm going to talk about in just a moment. And that you can just use your hands with. I just push an even pressure with my hands. But I'm going to try the rolling pin to see if I can get an even better print that way. So we're going to ink up our plate using paint, and I'm going to use a paintbrush. I'm going to start with plain paper. I do have these colorful papers, but I'm going to try just one print first. So I've just got this white paper, and it's a little heavier than most, so it can probably hold some paint. Now you might also see I have sort of this junk mail I am using as a table protectant, so that's always a good idea because art can be kind of messy. So I am going to be painting the paint right onto my Collagraph and then printing it. I'm actually going to move this paper so I don't actually get paint on it. Now you could use multiple colors if you want to. I might just try one because I want to see how my textures are working. So I am going to go with this blue color, and because I'm just using one, I'm going to see if I can just go right from the bottle. And I want to try to do a pretty good job of getting the paint everywhere. Now, if we were working in a printmaking studio, we might use printmaking ink to do this, but I'm using acrylic because that's what I have at home. I'm trying to make do. So I am just kind of trying to get the paint everywhere. The other thing about coating it before we print is that it is going to make it so the paint doesn't dry as quickly. The paint won't be absorbed into the paper or the cardboard, so we're probably going to get a much cleaner print by having it coated with Mod Podge or polyurethane or whatever you have around. So paint's a little bit lower than I thought. Okay. And depending on what you have, you might not want to take too much time because your paint might be drying. And I like how it's really stiffened up the yarn on this. I have a good feeling about how that's going to print. And this could be a project where maybe you make the plate today and then tomorrow you are able to print your plate. So, because it might need to dry or you might need to coat it. Okay. And I'm just using a paintbrush because I really want to try to get paint sort of everywhere. I feel pretty good about this. Just trying to make sure I have paint everywhere. And I'm trying to do it kind of quickly so none of my paint dries on the surface. Okay. Now, what I am going to do is I am going to put my paper down. I have a little bit of blue paint on this, but it's going to go on the back. So I think that's okay. And then I'm going to try to use a rolling pin and do a nice even roll. And then I'm going to put my Collagraph right in the center. Something important is to make sure it stays where it goes. So I'm going to take my rolling pin, and I don't want to get paint on my rolling pin because this is actually my cooking rolling pin, but if I can, I'm just going to try to give it a nice even roll carefully because I don't want my plate to move on the paper. I want it to stay exactly where it is so I get a really nice print. It's sort of like if you accidentally move a stamp while you're stamping it, you don't get as nice of a print. Okay. All right, it's the big reveal. Okay. I think I could use a little bit of work on mine, but I'm pretty happy with that actually. I think that's a good start. And what this tells me is that I might need more paint. But I'm starting to see all of my textures and I like that that's coming through. So it looks like I'm figuring out exactly where I need to put a little bit more paint. All right, I'm gonna try another print on one of these colored papers, and then I'm gonna talk about an alternative to making a Collagraph plate such as this. The other thing you can do is you can take one of these and you can put a little bit of water on it because water sometimes suctions up paint a little bit better. So I'm actually going to try putting some water on this paper. You can also soak it for a couple of minutes. So I think I am just going to pour a little bit of water, or I'm going to use a paintbrush and so I'm going to pour a little bit. But you could also put this in a tray or just like on a plate with a little bit of water, because it might hold up the paint a little bit better. A lot of printmaking processes where you're using a printing press, that's how it's going to be done. You're going to have the paper soaking in water because it's really going to suction up that print and get all of the fine details. So we'll press this a little bit, take off some of the extra water, and then I'm going to add a little bit more paint, and I'm actually going to add black paint to see what happens. Because sometimes art is about experimenting. Every time you make a plate like this, the first time you print it, you don't know what's going to happen, which is sort of part of the excitement. in that you will find out, and you don't know. Now imagine that once you're done with this, it's probably going to be the best idea to wipe the extra paint off of your plate. And I say that because you can use it again later. And the more paint that you let build up on your plate, it is going to be sort of taking away from some of the other possible textures. So it might be erasing some of that wonderful texture you've worked so hard to create. So I'm going to try something a little bit different this time, which is that I am going to put another layer of paper, almost like a printing press, to really push it and to hold it in place. All right. All right, so the paper is damp. I'm going to lay it flat. And once I put my plate on, I'm actually going to put another paper before I roll it. Now remember, you really want to keep it where it goes. But we also want to adhere it really well with our press of a rolling pin. So I'm just going to try to give it a good roll. I mean, the other option is just using your hand. So now that I've done a little bit of that, I actually might remove this, and I'm just going to see if I can give it a good hand press, because that's going to be, you're going to sort of also feel where the textures are and where they need to imprint. Okay? All right. Oh, I'm actually pretty happy with that. So some of my textures still need a little bit of work to come through, but I like how my rope is coming through, and I also like how this foam is printing. So it just takes a little bit of practice, and you'll find out exactly what you like about what you're doing. Now, the other process I wanted to talk about, in case this seems a little bit too intensive for you, is making a stamp. So I sometimes make stamps with just craft foam and cardboard, and they work really well. So I have a cardboard backing, and I have this shape that I have cut. This is actually a magnifying glass. I have a lot of stamps like this. And I simply paint right on here and also push it down. So it's a very similar process. Craft foam, if you have any at home, some of it has adhesive on the back and you could peel it off. It just sort of looks like this. It's pretty thin. You can cut whatever shape you like. I sometimes use hot glue to attach it to cardboard, but you don't have to use hot glue. You could use white glue and let it dry again. And then I just use acrylic paint, or if you have tempera, that would work too, and I paint an even coat and I push it down. So there are lots of different ways you can do DIY printmaking at home. So I hope that you have enjoyed making a collagraph print with me today. Thank you for joining me, I appreciate it. And I hope that you have a wonderful day.